Divorcing a difficult spouse? Are you being bullied? Are you feeling that you're being pushed to agree to a financial settlement that you can't be sure is enough? Are you in danger of saying yes to a settlement or child arrangements just to get your spouse to stop hassling you? Are you scared that once one battle is over, another begins? Are the courts being used as weapons against you, costing you potentially thousands? Are the children being caught up in the crossfire? This workshop is for you. Save thousands even if you're dragged through the courts. Don't agree to settlements that are not fair or sustainable and prove why that's the case. Make sure that you can co-parent your children even if you have the ex from hell. I will be joined by legal, financial, well-being and co-parenting experts. On the divorce workshop, we have some brilliant specialists there, focused on dispute resolution, keeping you out of court, saving you thousands and thousands of pounds. And we're recording it and putting it in a special safe place. Don't let anyone bully you into a decision. We can help make sure that you make the right decisions that give the fairest and most sustainable settlement for you and your family. Welcome to everyone who's able to be here right now, and also for those of you who are watching the recorded version. You can probably see that the previous video was done during COVID. I had COVID hair, so hence my looking slightly different now, a bit more tidy. So we're going to move on swiftly. I just wanted to introduce you to my amazing experts who are going to be joining us. We've got Joanne, who's a mediator. We've got Henry, the financial wizard. We've got Ruth, who helps you deal with controlling and coercive relationships. Austin has very kindly joined us today. He is a lawyer, but he's also a mediator and collaborative lawyer. More about that later. And Susan is going to be ending with a lovely healing just to bring us all back down to earth at the end. A little bit about me. I think most of you probably hopefully have seen my TEDx, which usually explains pretty quickly why I do what I do. And I'm not a mediator, but I am affiliated to the Family Mediators Association because I effectively boot camp people for dispute resolution and help dispute resolution become a more valuable tool, really by making sure that you know how it works and who you need to help prepare you to get the best out of it, and how to use all the different tools in the peace toolbox, which I'll be going through later. But also we'll be talking about how, what do you do when your spouse isn't reasonable and is difficult, and that's what we'll be talking about as well. So a quick orientation, don't worry, I am recording this, and so if for some reason life gets in the way and you have to leave, you will be able to see the rest of the workshop. Don't worry about that. I'll be adding it onto the website and the app and letting you know about how to find that afterwards. I'm sure you all know how to use Zoom now, but just to make sure, the chat button there, you can pop in at the chat. I'm going to be asking you questions, so please have the chat open. Feel free to ask questions. Any questions that don't get answered during the workshop, I will keep that and make sure they get answered, but usually we do a pretty good job. So do share in the chat. Try to keep it on everyone as well. I'll go into that in a bit just to make sure, in case you're not used to using it. You're allowed as well, obviously stay muted until we do the breakout room, but please feel free to do little thumbs up, hearts, or and just generally show your emotions. That's absolutely fine. So with the chat response, do watch. It should default to everyone. Please don't send private messages to people. You've got one-to-ones that you can have, a complimentary one-to-one with as part of your ticket with this workshop, so you don't need to do that. Obviously people who are watching the recording, you don't have to worry about that, and you probably already been asked to tell me who you need to talk to. But those you haven't spoken to, when you've watched this workshop, there may well be others that you think, I really do want to have a session with them, so just let me know. But I'll be asking you that during the workshop as well. And we'll be covering all kinds of things, really driven by your questions and responses in the chat. We can cover financial bullying, legal guidance, dealing with bullies, generally avoiding overwhelm. That's a big one. We'll have the Q&As, children stuck in the middle. We will have a little breakout room later on, so you can actually, if you don't have to, but if you want to ask some questions of the experts, you can face to face. And we'll end with a lovely healing. I'm hoping that you've all accessed through the app the Divorce Organiser and Planner. It's a free download. There's a link in there. Again, I will make sure you get resent that as well afterwards, just to make sure. It's just a useful way when you're talking to different people and controlling your own divorce and co-parenting journey. It's an easy way to keep track of everything, because it's quite easy to get quite lost with who you've spoken to and what's their phone number. So I've created something simple where you can put all of that together, and that's all included. And we will be, of course, with the whole financial side. We're going to start with the finances, because that, let's face it, tends to be why most of you are here. That's the bit that can get really messy and hairy, and we don't like that. So we're going to do our best to make sure you're aware of how to avoid things getting out of hand. And luckily, you don't have to know all about the finances, because we've got Henry Elliston, who's a chartered financial planner. But the kind of things that people want to know is what's it really is realistic to ask for. Feel free to put in the chat if that's you. Just say yes if you are, in fact, thinking, I'm not quite sure what to be asking for in the settlement. The experts, most of them are already also in the chat, so they can correspond with you in there as well. Childcare, if the mum wants to work, or can I afford it? All of these financial things that it's really good to do a bit of homework first, and to know where you are before you start discussing things with your soon-to-be ex. And then, can I afford to keep the house? That's a big one. That if any of you are in that situation, please feel free to share. So I'm going to introduce you to Henry. Henry's not a normal financial planner, he's a chartered one. So that is actually the minority of them. So that just means he's done a lot more exams than your normal financial expert. But he can, as I like to say it, look in a crystal ball, look into the future, and tell you, are you going to have enough? Are you going to have enough to live off? So the way you design the way you split the finances has to be based on your needs now, but also in what you want for the future. So it's a very sensible approach. Unfortunately, it's not the one that most people take. So Henry is not a lawyer himself. He doesn't need to be. He is part of Resolution Family Law Association, however, and most of the financial questions that you have, he's the right person to be talking to. Not necessarily a lawyer, but anything that's legal, he would obviously refer you to the lawyer. So welcome, Henry.
Hello, how's it going, Susie?
Very good.
Always nice to be referred to as normal. So,
makes a change. I've got you all sorted and set up with your slides. So you're going to take us all on a lovely little journey, and I love this journey, because it always amazes me how revealing it is, and how it really helps people understand not just why it's a really good idea for them to talk to you, but also how by doing the homework up front, it can impact that, not just the kind of settlement they then ask for, but also it makes it more obvious that it's probably best not to be spending thousands in court. It's so unnecessary, because the kind of clever stuff that you're going to be telling us about isn't something you're going to be talking about with a judge, is it? It's what you do up front with you.
No, that's right. No, absolutely right. And I think it is. Hopefully what you'll see is it just brings a bit of clarity and openness to the whole picture. Because I know myself, when I look at just a spreadsheet of numbers, it means nothing to me. But actually, by bringing it to life and putting it in pictures and showing it in that way, just helps hopefully give people comfort that they've got the right settlement, and they're going to have enough money to power them through the rest of their lives. Or if they're not, at least it highlights that fact.
Yeah.
And then people can start to make plans around it.
Yes, no point keeping the house if you can't afford to actually keep the house. So yeah. Right. So I'm going to let you loose on everyone now, and enjoy, everyone.
Thanks, Susie. So thanks all for coming along tonight, or for logging in and watching this whenever you're watching. I think I always like to start this just by by wondering why you're here, and perhaps it's because you're worried and nervous about whether or not you're going to get the right settlement through your divorce. Are you going to get the right share of the family assets? As Susie's alluded to, can you afford to take on the mortgage on your own? What about the pensions? And there are some weird and wonderful pensions out there. So are you going to get the right pension and the right share of that pension? And I suppose, really and fundamentally, are you going to be able to continue to live in the manner to which you're accustomed? And if not, what can we do about that? And how can we help to ensure that you can lead as normal a life as possible after your divorce? And I think that fundamentally is really the understanding the power that financial planning can add to the divorce process. And without having a clear plan, what I find the clients who haven't used me yet go into it with fear and worry, and hopefully with a bit of help, they come out of it with a proper understanding of the right path to go forward, so that when they go and then meet with their mediators or their lawyers, they've got a clear understanding of the assets that they want to get from the divorce, because they know that that's important, and also, and importantly, the assets that they can quite happily relinquish, because in fact they're not going to create that much of a great deal in the future. But before I go into that, let me just a quick run through of who I am. As Susie's mentioned, I'm a chartered financial planner. I've been working in the industry for about 16, 17 years, something like that. I've kind of lost count now. I started off with mortgages. I don't really do those any longer. I work with a great girl who does. Then moved into pensions. And then latterly, over the last 5 years or so, I've really moved into financial planning as opposed to financial advice. And I'll show you what I mean by financial planning in a little while. But what we're really doing with that is we're trying to take the focus away from the products that you buy and trying to really look at your lives and how we can help you going forward, getting the right things in the right place, and knowing what your life will look like in the future. It's always a bit of a funny thing. Why use a financial planner? You're already maybe signed up with a mediator, a lawyer. You might have accountants on board if there's businesses involved, and it might just seem like just another professional that you're bringing into the mix. And I like to think of it as that the legal team that you put in place are your negotiator in chief. As Susie said, I'm not a lawyer. I know a bit of the law around getting divorced, as you'd expect, but really not an awful lot of it. I'm here just to help you with some of the tactics that you're going to bring to battle with you. It's worth finding out what's worth fighting for, what's worth not fighting for. And also, I hope to save you money. I hope to be able to help you put together, and I'll show you this, help to put together plannings and things like this, which actually solicitors on the whole, I find, don't really want to talk about. They'd much rather you got on with it on your own. I suppose fundamentally, I can say that you need my advice. If the implications of your if you understand the implications of your financial decisions through your divorce, if you understand those, great. But if you are unclear about the implications, then talking to me is probably a worthwhile venture, if only just to get a heads up. So let's move on. What are the 5 areas that I think fundamentally you need to review through this process of divorcing? The first is preparation, understanding what you've got, where you've got. Most commonly, this will be done through the form, I just mentioned it, and that's getting down on a piece of paper, essentially, the financial assets that you've got. And if you need help with that, understanding a pension statement, understanding what's in an ISA, how much savings, is it really true that he's only got this much money in a bank account when he seems to earn a lot more money than that? We can sense check all of that for you and then review what the other side put together. And I think that, if nothing else, is a really great way of saving you some time and some money, just allowing us to come in and help with that. The next part is property, and by property I mean investments as well as bricks and mortar. As I've alluded to, I work with a really, really great mortgage advisor who also works with lots of people who are going through divorce. And it's not as simple as to say, from a mortgage point of view, that you will get 4 times your income or 5 times your income or what have you. Mortgages are a lot more complicated beasts than that nowadays. And they take into account things like other debts that you're going to have to repay. It takes into account spousal maintenance or child maintenance orders that you might receive. And bringing all these into the mix, it's really important so that you can understand fully how much mortgage you can borrow, but then importantly, how much that's going to cost you. So it's well worth talking to a proper mortgage advisor, not just going on to a quick, a summary on Halifax's website, for example. Pensions, really complicated. There are some slightly more straightforward ones that are just pots of money, and then some much more complicated ones that doctors will have, or people in the uniformed services, final salary pensions. And that takes a little bit more head scratching, working out how best to share those so that you get a rightful proportion of the pot, as it were. And when we've understood all of those bits, what we then come to is we put a plan together so that you understand how this is all going to look for you in the future. And then potentially, especially if there's maintenance orders that are involved, I often think having some element, whilst you're still married and have insurable interest in one another, having some element of life assurance there is really, really important. Because if your ex dies and you're reliant upon their income to support you and the family going forward, well, as soon as they're dead, you're not getting any of that money. So still maintaining a level of protection can be really, really important. So financial disclosure, the Form E, what's in the pot? What do you expect them to have in the pot? And I think that can be a really tricky thing to understand, because especially as you get towards divorce, and I hear it from so many people, there's a feeling of mistrust, and that feeling of, I'm sure he said he earned or she said she earned this much money, and yet now they've presented their Form E, it turns out that they're really £20,000 in debt. We will help in the first instance in getting your Form E ready for you. It can be quite a daunting form. It doesn't need to be. It's really asking you common sense questions, and certainly we will go through that and help you fill in those boxes. And then when you disclose with one another your financial position, we can help you go through that and work out whether or not what they're saying does make sense check it for you, or whether or not it's worthwhile going back and getting the mediator or the lawyer just to do a little bit more digging and probing to make sure everything has been disclosed. So now we've got to the position that we understand your financial picture, your marital debts, and so your marital position, sorry. And so it's at this point we look to start to put a plan together. And to do this, I'd like to go through this example, which is a real life case. A client of mine a few years ago now, and they were getting divorced. Backstory is that he was a little bit older than her. I think she was about 40. He was in his mid to late 40s. He worked in advertising. I can't remember what she did. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Lived in London, in a flat in London. They had an investment property as well, and then a little bit of savings. They were actually in the happy position that the flat that they owned outright. They'd had some inheritance, and that had paid off all the mortgage. But the massive disparity that they had between them was in the pension, where he'd been working in the corporate world. He had a very significant pension of about £400,000 saved up, and she really hadn't done an awful lot at all towards pension planning and only had about 30,000. So this is where they started out in terms of their assets. Now, she was very, very keen to remain in London. It's where her friends were. She had no interest in moving anywhere else. He, on the other hand, wanted to move back up north. I think his family lived up there. I think it was in Manchester, and so his intention was to move up there. So we had a look at how we could cut the assets fairly, and it seemed an obvious solution was that she got the flat in London, He got the investment property, which I think was just outside Birmingham. We did a little bit of a pension share just to try and bring things into order, and then the cash and the liquid assets that remained split between them. And it seemed like a reasonable enough. It seemed like a reasonable enough solution. Everyone got what they wanted. Um, she had an elevated pension slightly. He had a reduced pension. Still a bit of time to build up some assets, but something about it didn't seem quite right to me. And so what we did is we put this through a cash flow forecasting tool. And this is the result that we see from the cash flow forecaster. So the blue charts show this was for the wife, the income that she receives every year going forward. The black line that you see going through it shows how much she spends, and you'll see there's a few spikes in the way because I think she wanted to model in her buying a car, and then at 60 there was some sort of retirement party or 60th birthday party. I can't remember exactly. Anyway, so we could see that actually, if she took this settlement, she was going to be all right, and she could live all the way through until she was probably about 80 before running out of money. Sadly, at 80, she did run out of money, and she was going to be on the state pension for the rest of her life. And we demonstrated this further by then showing another chart of how her liquid assets would build up and then diminish through her lifetime. And this is what we saw. So the pink is the money that she holds in cash. That was 25,000. There was an ISA as well that I didn't mention, but the ISA was in blue, and then she had this pension, and so the pension started at about 100,000. It rose in value to 200 or so thousand, and then fell over her retirement over first 15 years or so of her retirement. So that's okay, but I was just never very happy about it. So instead, we did a little bit of thinking. And what we reckoned was that the husband was still a high earner, and so he still had great capacity to save significant sums into his pension. They didn't have a mortgage on the London flat, but she had ample capacity to borrow, and mortgage rates being what they are very low at the moment. There was an argument that said that why doesn't she borrow a little bit of money now? She can use that to pay him off, and in return, she can get a slightly bigger slug of his mortgage. This had a further benefit in that he wanted to go and buy another property. And so his intention was that he was going to sell the investment property, and then he could use the cash that she was releasing from their former marital home. And so he then had whatever 370 odd thousand pounds, and he was going to top that up. He was looking to buy a place for about $500,000 too. He would top that with a mortgage in his own right. So they both had properties they wanted to live in, both had reasonable pensions, and they both also managed to split the pot pretty much down the middle. There were no children or anything like that to worry about, so it was unlikely that the share of assets was going to be distorted hugely in one direction over the other. And so with this share put together, they went back to mediation, and they were both quite comfortable with it, because certainly for the wife, we then showed what does life look like for her now, with this mortgage, but with a slightly greater pension. And the great news was that we had managed to extend her, financial well-being well into the 90s. We added about another 15 years of financial security, so that she was about 95 before her money ran out, which for most people should get to. Well, average age is now I think 87 for a lady, so hopefully we got her to the end of her life. And again, this chart just shows the benefit of upping that pension lump sum right at the beginning, allowing it to grow a little bit, and then how much longer it takes to deplete through her retirement. The second stage, or the third stage, I should say, once we have got this plan together, was that this lady then said, well, I don't know what to do with the pension. It's all well and good, me getting £200,000 of pension. What do I do with the pension? And that, I suppose, is where the next stage of our help and our service comes in. I work for a company called True Potential, and we work with some of the really best investment houses in the world, actually. So the likes of UBS, Goldman Sachs, Schroders, Allianz, and we come together to help put brilliant portfolios together. And so for this lady, we then took the money, the pension share that she received, we've invested it into a top-notch pension with an eye on the fees that she's paying, the levels of risk that she's happy to take. And now I go back and I visit her every year to make sure that things are ticking on. And it's nice to say, happy story in the end that actually she's met another fella. And of course, the whole financial plan that I put together is probably going to be completely written off because he's also got some money, and so things look completely different. But that's just life, and it works really, really well. So what are the next steps? So if you're happy and you think it would be useful to meet up, fantastic. Susie's, there's a QR code there, and if you click on that, that will take you through to a Calendly link. And there's another QR code there. Loads of QR codes coming out of your ears. The process will be that we'll have a chat on the phone for about half an hour, so I understand your position. If we can then move forward from there, because I think I really can help, we'll have an hour and a half Zoom meeting, no charge for that. That's really to understand the nitty gritty of your financial position. Thereafter, I'll go and put a plan together for you, and we'll have another meeting about the plan. The plan we will charge a fee for, and thereafter we go and do the investments, set up the mortgages, and all the rest of it, and we can talk about that if we get to that stage. So hopefully that's giving you a really good idea of how financial planning can help as you go through your divorce.
Thank you, Henry. And anyone who's watching now live, we've got the experts here. So if you've got particular questions, fire them away in the chat. For those of you who are watching recorded, you can fire those questions into the chat in the Secret Divorce group, and they will also get answered. So, and of course, if you should be having a one-to-one with any of the experts, that's all part of your ticket. So Henry, just before you go, I know you're going to stay actually because we're going to have you in the group sort of legal mediation and financial chat. But what would you say are kind of the top couple of mistakes that people make that you see all the time that you want to warn people about?
I think, the biggest mistake is going. And I know you know someone who's done this. So one of the big mistakes is going in and being determined that you're going to keep a particular asset, and it's often the family home, when actually in reality it's probably unaffordable to do that. And the last thing you want to do is go into a negotiation, fight for something, settle it, and then find out that 2 years down the line that actually you couldn't do it, and now you're having to sell the house and downsize when actually you should have done something else. But in truth, I think it's having a real understanding of your finances and what your finances are going to look like in the future. So doing sensible budget planners and understanding that and it's tricky at the moment. I know that because COVID has meant that everyone's budget planner is completely wrong. But it's trying to understand how much do I spend, and then thinking forward and saying, how is that likely to change? And I appreciate that's tricky because, as a family, perhaps one person pays the bills and one person pays for the food or whatever. So how's that going to change? It does become tricky to work through that. But it's hugely important to know, actually, if you spend £3,000 a month, that's very different to only spending £2,000 a month. So I think that's important. The other thing I often find, and it is connected to the house, is how much mortgage can you get, and how much is that going to cost you? Because you quite possibly get more than you need, but it's whether or not that's an affordable sum to really take forward. And also it's how the other bits interact with it. And I quite often find that people find that they can get a mortgage, say, of 200, but actually when the spousal maintenance or the child maintenance is placed into that their mortgage affordability becomes much greater. So those are the sort of highlights and things that I would look at.
Brilliant. Thank you, Henry. Stay with us now. We're going to bring in our mediator and our lawyer. Austin is a lawyer, but he's also a trained mediator as well. Is what I call the right kind of lawyer, and he's a collaborative lawyer. I'll be going over a little bit more about what that means later for those who don't already know. But first of all, I just want you to meet them. So we've got Henry here and we've got Austin. Thank you so much for joining us, Austin. I'm just going to make sure everyone can now be unmuted so they can speak. And I seem to be having a problem with Joanne. You've unmuted. Brilliant. We're all here. That's the technology done. So any particular questions that you've got in the chat, I think you can all see the chat. You can bring things in from the chat, or actually what the other thing we'll do is just, I'd like to do really what I've just done with Henry, is to have those kind of top tips of what to avoid, the big mistakes that people often make. If you could just start with those, that would be really helpful. Perhaps Austin, I mean, as a lawyer, you must see plenty of people making mistakes at quite early stages. What kind of general advice would you give to people who are ideally at the early stage of this whole process?
I mean, Joanne and myself, we're both family mediators. So I would say, even though it might be difficult to have these conversations between you, I wouldn't dismiss mediation, because if you can agree everything or narrow down the issues between you, then that's going to really help to keep the cost down. Mm-hmm. There is a government voucher scheme in operation at the moment, so you can get £500 towards your mediation. So I would try and work together to try and find children and financial matters, decide it in mediation. If you can agree it, you can then take it to your solicitor, who can then draft it into a legal document. So mediators and solicitors working in collaboration can really help to drive down the cost that you would normally incur if it did go to court. And
Terry's asked a question in the chat. She said her solicitor said that she would want to ask for him in terms of financial settlement. So will I be paying Henry for his advice and also my solicitor? Well, I assume you mean, Terry, and we could talk more about this in the breakout room later, that I think there's a lot of confusion with people thinking that the lawyers do all of it. And obviously lawyers do understand how a family court will deal with the financials, especially if your soon-to-be ex drags you into court despite your best efforts to stay out. But it isn't the same as sitting down there, getting a really good financial plan together and understand and coming in prepared. Could you say a little bit about that, Austin, to help clarify that for people?
Again, it's good to really unbundle the services. So on the financial side, we can advise from the legal perspective what the law is, what would be a fair financial settlement. But obviously, once you've achieved that financial settlement, or in the run up to it, it would be good to speak to Henry, and then he can advise you on, once you, for example, receive that lump sum, what you should be doing with it. Because as lawyers, we wouldn't advise how to invest a financial settlement. That would be the role of Henry.
And equally, if whether it's before mediation or if you're unlucky court, if someone was working with a financial planner like Henry and had a clarity on what would be the best things to fight for, that they're actually going to be representing their real needs and what's affordable. If there may be legal questions on how a court would view it, is that right? What they would see as being a bit cheeky or acceptable. Things that which you could get away with, couldn't you, in Joanne, in mediation, because you're in charge of mediation. But when it comes to going to court, there's a sort of a sense of, you as a family lawyer would get a sense of what the courts would go for. Is that right?
You need to choose where to pick your battles. For example, if the item is worth less than £500, I think ideally you need to try and agree a schedule of who gets what between you, rather than having lots of solicitor correspondence sent, because then the disadvantages are you could spend more arguing about the item in correspondence than the actual value of the item.
I'm sure you've seen that happen in the past, as we all have. Thank you, Austin. And Joanne, with the mediation, one of the things I'm often referring people to for is, sadly, not just mediation, but which is a good thing, but they're trying to mediate with someone that is actually very, very difficult to mediate with. And I always say, look, if you can get them into that Zoom room, or if because you may not want to be face to face with them in person, there are breakout rooms. It isn't impossible. You don't have to be friends to mediate. Perhaps you could say a little bit about that, because I know you have a lot of experience in that area.
So when it comes to mediating with somebody who is not so easy to get on with, or where the communication is quite poor, it is possible to have a Zoom meeting where you don't have to see the other person. You don't even have to hear their voice if you find that that is problematic for you. So how it would work, I would move from room to room. Everybody stays put in a room, but I do the moving. I move between you. And the idea is that as I speak to one person, I will then take a summary of that to the other person and relay that, find out what they've got to say, take a summary, and then go back to the other person. So that's how that works. It does take a bit longer because I'm having to explain what that person said to the other person, who obviously hasn't heard it because they're in the other room, before we can move on. But in where you have parties where that communication is really strained, it really does work very well, and you can get to the same outcome as you would do if you were in the room together and the communication between you were much better.
Thank you, Joanne. And Henry, I think something that people are often surprised about when I give them a divorce strategy session is I suggest that not only, obviously, they should be talking to you about the finances, but that if their other half is up for it, because it's to their advantage to be so, that you can actually join into a mediation or a collaborative law process and be there to answer questions from the other person's soon-to-be ex. Is that right?
Yeah. Just in the way that Joanne would in a mediation session. So I've been to a few mediation sessions to, well, one, I mean, I've worked in two ways. One preparing just for one side a report and a plan to show how that might look for my client, and then I've been into mediation to explain this to the other side, to say, look, this is why this person is battling over this particular asset, because we're showing you here why it's important for them. But also I've worked with both sides and sat down and said, look, this is your pot, what do you both want from it? And I must confess, it doesn't happen very often, but I find that you do get a pretty decent result from it.
Yeah, no, we're always very happy, aren't we, Henry, when that happens? I always hold it out as a bit of hope. I see sometimes, not always, but sometimes you'll sit down with Henry, sort it out, invite the other person in, and they'll go, well, that makes sense. I think it's the graphs. They like the graphs, so they just make sense.
I like the pictures, that's it.
And you can see that there's no one's trying to get something over on the other person. It's all very practical. Numbers don't lie. This is just how it is. I think it takes a lot of the heat out of it. Yeah,
that's it. You can show the pictures for both sides that way. So if it's a case of you're both going to have enough money for the next 10 years if you split it this way, oh, okay, well, that makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, there's less to fight over than most people think. Takes some of the heat out. But obviously, Joanne, you've got people who are in a quite strong, deep emotional state sometimes. They might be frightened. And so that adds a lot of complication, doesn't it? Could you talk a little bit about how mediation is a safe space where people really get heard? Because I think there is a big myth about being heard in court, which of course they're not. It's a pretty soulless experience, isn't it? So actually, if someone wants to be heard, they're funnily enough better off going to mediation, aren't they? Or using the collaborative process. But if you could say a bit more about that, Joanne.
So in terms of a lot of people who come to me, I find that they're very unhappy because they find that they feel a certain way about things, and they feel like the other person hasn't ever really responded to the concerns that they've raised. By the time we get into mediation, it's very clear that sometimes when it comes to the communication, it may be in an argument, voices are raised, and the other person will hear the tone of that voice or the volume, the sound, but they are not focusing on what's actually being said. So in mediation, we have ground rules right at the very beginning. That is about everybody has to respect the other person, everybody else that's in the room. And also that as a facilitator, I'll make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak, but you also get an opportunity to respond to something the other person has said. And that way, your voice is heard, because part of what I do, especially if what's been said is based on an emotion, I will ask the other person, did you actually hear what they said? What does that mean to you? Just to make sure that they really did hear that. And often they've heard it for the first time. The other person will say, I've been saying this for years. And it's just interesting to see the look on that person's face when they've actually heard something. And then suddenly it makes sense why the other person has acted in that way. And then once that's kind of resolved, it's much easier then to move on and deal with the real reason that everybody's here. And that's, like sorting everything out.
Thanks, Joanne. And just to round off, Austin, I'm going to throw a quickie one, sort of tricky one at you. I come across this all too often where someone is divorcing someone who's being very, very difficult, and they are not listening even to the court. They're not providing the right information they should, so they can't even sit down properly and work with Henry. They can do a certain amount, but you need the figures from the other person to really finish the job, if ideally, but then just not playing ball. And so there are times when they do need to talk to a solicitor and do need to use the system, but as we know, the system isn't always ideal. What advice do you have for people when they're in that sort of situation?
It's not an easy situation to be in, but I guess you need to make the other party who's not cooperating aware that if they continue to be like that, there could be consequences against them if they go to court. I guess from a children perspective, again, there could be penalties there. So they can really only make life difficult for so long, because eventually if it does go to a final hearing, then it's likely to catch up with them. And also, if they have got children together, what message is it giving to the child if the two parents can't co-parent together? Yeah. So it's really, I would stress to the other party who's not cooperating that when the child is older, how would they like to describe the divorce to that child? Would it be one where they have been able to co-parent, or where they've had to have hearing after hearing for a judge to make a decision for them? And there is a big backlog in the courts, so a lot of families now are turning to arbitration. If both parties agree for the matter to be heard through an arbitrator, then that could be a quicker, cheaper, more cost-effective way rather than going through the court system.
And I'll be mentioning that later in the sort of peace toolbox as one of the options. And finally, Austin, you are a solicitor you'll happily take on the whole case and do it all for them if needed, but you'll also unbundle as well. So, for example, if they were working with Henry to do the financials, working out the best way to split it, maybe they've done some mediation with Joanne, but the soon-to-be ex is just suddenly being a really, really difficult and needs a legal letter sent. They can have initial session with you anyway, a paid session to understand their rights overall, but also they could be having that session to deal with sticky situations like that where they do need a legal letter sent. Is that without having to have you do the whole thing for them?
It's obviously down to the client. Some clients want us to do everything. Other clients, like you said, they come to us, have the advice, we give them a strategy on how to move things forward, and then they decide as and when they contact me for assistance, whether it be for a letter, assistance with a hearing, assistance preparing a consent order. It's obviously down to the client how much input they want from the solicitor.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, all. And yes, everyone who's watching live, these guys are in the chat. And for those watching the recording, I can, talk to me in the Secret Divorce group, and I can connect you with whoever you need to speak to. Ruth, now we're going to move on about getting sort of the sort of psychological side. But what's special about Ruth is she specialises in dealing with difficult, coercive, controlling characters, and sadly there do seem to be quite a lot of those about. So we're going to bring Ruth in now. So you've been I love referring people to you because quite often, even when there's been quite a difficult situation, you've managed to help you only need one person to stay sane, I would say, to keep things out of court as much as possible. We always hope. But sometimes if you're really frightened of the other person, or they're a real bully, or they've got financial control over you, that's a tricky situation. And you might be scared to go into mediation, even if you're going to be in a breakout room. So when people in those situations, I always recommend they have a session with you, because you do seem to have a great knack of helping them be able to take to build their confidence and to be able to know how to deal with that and to communicate better. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as you rightly say, Susie, a lot of the people that I work with are dealing with an ex who can be toxic. And when you're dealing with someone like that, there's one really important tenet that is keen to know, which is that normal rules don't apply. So where you're expecting, if I put, a reasonable proposal forward, or I expect them to be reasonable with me, and so often that doesn't happen. And what happens then is that triggers you quite seriously, and it's really detrimental to your whole well-being in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of challenge anyway. So understanding where that person is coming from, because there'll be surprising things that you will not have thought of. We're looking at what drives that person, for example, so that you can then be ahead of what's likely to happen next. It's also about being able to keep your emotions under control, because the problem is when your emotions are all over the place, you're unlikely to be able to make the kind of decisions that are going to be creating the best outcome for you within this situation. And the other thing that happens is you end up feeling that you're behaving in a way that you don't even recognize yourself. So it's really important that you know how to stay in control of who you are, so that you're able to conduct yourself in a way that aligns with your values and in a way that feels congruent for you. But the other really important thing here is that, especially if you're in a situation where you're co-parenting with this person, what you'll be learning with me are skills that will take you through the rest of your life, not just through this divorce. Because sometimes, yes, you can get the paperwork done, but that's not the end of the problem. And if you've got somebody who seems to take delight in creating chaos in your world, even if it's to the detriment of their own children, you've got to know how to handle that, because you've got to know how you can gently but firmly be able to put those boundaries in place around what goes on in the future. You need to understand how you can stop the triggering and the intimidation that person, the situation that person puts you in when they make you feel that way. And so you do stand a great opportunity of being able to create a healthy and respectful relationship that will take you into the future, because you're redefining how the relationship will work with this person. And the last thing you want is that you're constantly being triggered and your well-being being totally undermined by the way this person conducts themselves.
It's one of
so
the
even
things,
just
yeah.
understanding what they do can stop a lot of that from affecting you.
Yeah, because you've been so immersed in it all those years, you just don't see from the outside what's actually going on. It always breaks my heart.
Neither does anybody else.
Yeah.
Neither does anybody else.
And it always breaks my heart when people say, "Oh, I can't." My soon-to-be ex is a raging narcissist. I can't use mediation. I have to use a lawyer. I have to go to court. And I explain, well, that's a playground for narcissists. They love that. They can have a great time.
Absolutely.
And yes. When you may need to send some legal letters and go to court, but you need to do it very strategically, and you need the right support. So would you say for those who one of the biggest issues is knowing that you're even in an abusive, controlling relationship? It never ceases to surprise me how many people I talk to who I'm saying to them, that's quite controlling. And we're talking quite extreme, but they're just so used to it. Are there some sort of key questions that people can ask themselves to realise that actually they are being perhaps a little bit blame-washed, gaslighted, or just controlled, and they've got so used to it and feel so vulnerable that they haven't even accepted that that's happening to them yet?
Yes, it's true. It can be very difficult to recognise that you are actually in an abusive relationship. But if you ask yourself, am I constantly having to check how that other person is going to react if I say or I do something? That's usually a red flag for you. Are you constantly in the situation where you're made to feel that things are your fault, or that you're not very good at things, even made to feel that there are many things at which you're quite useless? Do you find that this person makes you feel guilty quite a lot of the time? It's those general, when somebody makes you feel that you can't be yourself around them, then those are the red flags to look out for. I think one of the issues is that when we think of an abusive relationship, and there's more understanding around it now, but certainly we used to think that it was because there was physical violence involved. But that's not true at all, because there's the emotional, the verbal, the mental abuse, which and then the physical violence is just like a further manifestation of all of those things, all of the ways in which you as a person have been eroded over the years. And that's the big problem, is because it is like you are being eroded as a person when you've been many years with this particular individual.
So I would recommend anyone who recognises any of those traits and feels that it's absolutely essential for them to have the conversation with you. They get that part of their ticket. They get an initial consultation that you generously offer. I always recommend that they then do more, because until they can get a handle on that, how are they going to really work with Henry efficiently and sort out the finances if all the time they're saying or thinking, well, he won't allow that, or she's going to argue with that? And it just stops you thinking rationally and clearly. So it is a really important thing. It's not something they should just tag on at the end of the divorce. They should be talking to you right at the beginning. And of course, it helps with the mediation. You go into mediation and far more confident and clear. Yeah. And you've got some sort of proper support, haven't you?
Absolutely. And, it's also worth pointing out that, when you've been together with that person for many years, it may not be that one or the other partner is actually toxic, but it's just that you've got into toxic habits with each other. So just being able to remove those can just make a massive difference. And the fact of the matter is, it can be done quite quickly.
And revolutionises the co-parenting, and of course that's why when you do this is for the children at the end of the day and the next generation. And I'm glad you brought that up. It doesn't mean that someone's labelled as a narcissistic, horrible person. They don't. Yes, there are some people whose spots don't change, but you can learn to live and work with that, and that's part of what you teach them. And there's others, as you say, the situation's toxic, and I always say to people, when you're frightened and angry, we're all on the spectrum. We're not nice people, and we're not rational, and we're not kind, whoever you are. So thank you for pointing that out. Thank you very much, Ruth. And if you can stay in the chat, and if you're able to join us for the breakout room, that would be lovely. Thank you. So I'm going to whiz through some of the key strategies and just an overview for divorce. I know some of you already have started the process, but it's good to kind of see what, a bit like going up in a balloon and looking down on it and seeing it in a sort of simple, clear way, because I think it can be quite befuddling for people. Just so you know, obviously with the website, the app, there's one-to-one support, there's co-parenting tools. I've got some great resources there. I'll mention a little bit about some of those later. So, of course, it's from the 6th of April, we have the new system in the UK, and which is hallelujah, you don't have to blame each other anymore. So the template for the unreasonable behaviour I won't need to provide. So that's fantastic. So the other thing that you can also be able to do now is make a joint application, and that's just simply that sometimes if you're applying and you're not having to blame, I wouldn't have thought it matters too much, but just again, sometimes a couple go, well, we want to both apply for the petition, and they can, so that's great. Just saves people arguing about who's going to do it, though I usually find one person does it because they just deal with the admin and they just get on with it. And they have a 20 weeks, what they call a cooling off period. I don't know if it's cooling off or just an excuse, because between the petition and getting your the next stage of the divorce, the courts are so full, so even though it's just admin, it's taking a while. So it did used to take, you could do it like sometimes 3 to 4 months, the whole admin side. I'll explain that that's not the same as doing all the financials, and but just the admin side, you could do that quite relatively quickly in some places. But now it's going to be a minimum of 6 months from when you first put that petition in and it's accepted to when you get the final order at the end of the whole thing, and you're legally divorced and can go and marry someone else. No, quite often it takes that long anyway, so that's not such a terrible thing. But it's just important to be aware of, if you are planning to marry someone else, it's going to take you at least 6 months. The great thing is that you won't have to blame anyone anymore. And the other great thing is the other person can't contest it. So they can't go, no, you have to stay married to me. It didn't happen very often anyway, but it was just another hurdle, another thing that could create a bit of a palaver at the beginning. So it's great to know that, especially if you're divorcing someone who's really not very nice, you don't need to get them to agree to it. However, you do need to show that they have seen the petition. So if they're a difficult person and they are not going to respond and say, yes, I've seen this, the sending back the form that confirms that they've received it, that can result in you having to have a bailiff present it. We have some strategies around that, so come and talk to me if you're in that situation. But it's great that you don't, no one can force you to stay married to them. So yeah, the new terminology, which is much easier to understand: conditional order and a final order. So you put in the petition, when that's accepted. The conditional order is what I call the almost divorced, and then it's about 6 weeks, which is the case before they made the changes anyway, before you have what was the consent order. Now it's the final order, that whereupon you are legally divorced, but you are still tied together financially if you haven't created a consent order or financial order of any kind. So let's talk about those three what I call railway tracks, if you like. So the first is the admin. You've got your divorce forms. You can do it online. It's really, really easy. Make sure you've got your marriage certificate there to load a picture up. If it's not in English, you need to get it translated. Online divorce, there are some. I've got a link in my resources for a company I recommend if it's really, really straightforward, and certainly for doing the admin side, this part of it. If you don't want to do it yourself, they can do it for you. That's quite simple. If you just really, really want a human being, you can pay a lawyer to do it, but you will pay more than perhaps you need. But if you can afford it and you prefer that, that's great. But you don't have to do it that way. And yeah, it's the there's always ways to keep the legal costs down, and so that's my job, is really to help make sure that you do have those choices. Pensions and properties, very important. Financials, we've talked about that obviously in some detail. That's like a separate part of the process. So there are people who get very confused. They get divorced all the way through, they're legally divorced, they can remarry, and then they find out to their horror that they haven't sorted the finances. They haven't they may have agreed it, but they've got no legally binding agreement. They've got no consent order or financial order, and that's not a good thing, because you are still bound legally to that other person, which seems strange to a lot of people, but that's how it is. So that's why I always say, sort the financials early, get discussing them, work them out as soon as you put that petition in. Really get on the case, because that's often what not just causes complications but can really slow everything up. I recommend that unless there's a really good reason to, do not go through to the final financial order until you've sorted the finances, and they can then be submitted and become legally binding at that stage. And of course, co-parenting. People see that the co-parenting quite rightly is separate. So if your spouse is not paying money towards the children, that has no bearing on the decisions about the finances legally. It has, in a sense, that if they're claiming they're going to pay you and they haven't paid you anything, and they're not doing themselves any favours there. But ultimately, you do need to kind of mentally separate the two. However, when you're working with someone like Henry or with a financial planner, you will be obviously looking at the child rearing costs going forwards, and they will be part of your financials. So again, the sooner you can be creating a co-parenting plan together, again, I have resources on that I can provide. That's a good thing. You want to get all of these things going right from the start. So let's whiz you through what I call the Peace Toolbox. Key strategies. Mediation, we've already talked about. Don't believe anyone that says mediation doesn't work, or you won't work for you, won't work because of your difficult spouse. That's absolute rubbish. If you can get your spouse into a mediation, maybe initially just to talk about the children, rather than scaring them to death about the money, be strategic about it. You can often find that mediation is an incredibly quick and straightforward way to sort everything out. But do get ready for the mediation. Do your homework. Go in with your financial proposals, all prepared with the pretty pictures. Take Henry in to it with you if your spouse would like him there, so they can talk to him, or whichever financial planner you're using. So make sure you use mediation to the full. It can be for the children, or it can be for the finances. Not all mediators do both, but Joanne does, and so does Austin. Collaborative law. Austin is a collaborative lawyer, and a special training. It's like a different kind of lawyer. They have to be a normal lawyer first, and then they do the specialist training. And what they do is they sort of sit around a table, and you have to have a collaborative law as well. They, again, specially trained, not just a lawyer who says they work collaboratively. That's not the same thing. They have to be an official collaborative lawyer, and they talk to each other, and you don't, instead of sending letters backwards and forwards at huge expense, you talk over the table, and it's similar to mediation, but you've got a lawyer by your side, and it's a really, really fantastically sensible process. Obviously, it's going to cost you more than mediation, but if you need a lawyer by your side, or things are complicated, you might have your financial experts in there, maybe you're splitting a business, or it's just the way you prefer to do it. If you can agree to both work collaboratively and have collaborative lawyers, that's a great system, and one you should consider. And as Austin mentioned earlier, arbitration, a private judge, it's not as expensive as you would think, especially if you've done your homework and got your finances ready, and you're reducing the amount of time and work they need to do. You choose them yourself as a couple. So I still see it as part of it's keeping you out of court, and you're still in control to a point where you're getting someone to make a legally binding decision, like as a judge would, the same. But you're picking them, and you're picking someone who's a specialist in finances or a specialist in children's matters, that you don't necessarily get that when you go to court. You get whatever you get, and they may not be that hot on those areas. Their training might not be that great. So it's really, really not a good idea to go to family court if you can possibly avoid it. Worst case scenario, I would say use an arbitrator. The other way you can use an arbitrator strategically is whether it's mediation or collaborative law. If you get stuck on something, don't let it all unravel. You can take that one element, which might be around selling the house or over business shares, whatever it is, and get the arbitrator to decide just that point for you, which you must agree in advance. You will accept that, and then you can continue with the collaborative or mediation process, or the whole thing's wrapped up at that point, whatever. But the point is, you can use it as a tool in that way. So I wanted you to be aware of that. And of course, I'm firing all this information at you, but for your members of the Secret Divorce Group, you can ask questions at any time about any of this. And if you feel that you want to sit down and have a more intense discussion one-to-one, you can always book a session. So the reality of the court is, especially with children matters, even before COVID, it can take such a long time, and it's can be very traumatic and it's too slow, especially with young children. So wherever you possibly can, you want to avoid court with children, unless you really do have to lay down those boundaries. But perhaps you've got a spouse who isn't letting you have access to the children, for example. So FNF, Families Need Fathers, fantastic charity. They have a free helpline, and they help lots of fathers and mothers who have issues around accessing the children. But just be realistic that if you're going to take a court route, the timelines can be quite depressing. And I have some fantastic resources for co-parents. I've added them in recently, actually. Split Smart is a co-parenting. It's a plan, and I really encourage people, don't dive straight into using your online calendar without having a plan to link it to. So, for example, if you start having problems with the summer holidays about what days and how much time, you realise you're not getting the time that you'd agreed verbally, it's really useful to say that in our co-parenting plan we agreed 50-50, not and have that agreed on both parts, because you'd be surprised that in the everyday life of using your online calendar, things can change and shift and new partners appear, and if you can pin someone down to say, well, this is what we agreed, or go back to mediation to have a look at it again if it needs to be revised. It's a really smart move, and you can use Split Smart. They've got a template for $10 if you use the code that I've got from the guy who runs it. So it costs you nothing to do. So please do put a plan in place. We Parent is Our Family Wizard is another one, but We Parent is an online diary. It's a really nice one, and if you come through me, I can give you free access to that. And also I can get you a free subscription to Support Pay. Now, Support Pay is once you've sorted out if the child maintenance, and remember the money for the children and the money for spousal maintenance to support you bringing up the children are separate. People often think of them together, but you need to think of them as separate things. Support Pay will help you manage that, whether it's a case of just it's an app and the money goes in, and you can any agreements about how it's spent and what it's spent on, whatever you've agreed with each other, you can organise it through the Support Pay app. Or if your ex is being really, really difficult and the money has to be extracted from their employer, it can still go through the Support Pay app. So have a look at that as well. And again, I can get you a free subscription to that. So I'd really, really appreciate it if you can just pop into the Zoom chat a little bit of just the F for finances and a number. F1 is finances, no, got it sorted, not worried about it at all. Or F10 would be, I'm a bit stressed about this, I don't really understand it, I'm worried how, this could get messy, I'm worried about it. It's just really, really helpful for me to see where you are in that space. So F1 is everything's cool with the finances. F10 is I so need to talk to Henry, or I'm really worried about how we're going to that this could be a tricky aspect of our divorce. And the second one I'd love you to do is co-parent better. P1 would be got this nailed. We are if you have children, we've got no problem here. We've got it sorted. It's all perfect. And P2 is 10 rather. A P10 would be with your co-parenting, you're really thinking, this is going to be difficult. So if you're watching this live, pop that into the chat. If you're watching this as a recording, just write it down. It's really useful. And then share it afterwards in the Secret Divorce Group chat if you can. And then finally, A for afraid. From the emotional, psychological side of things, A1 would be I'm on top of the world, I've got no worries about any of this, I'm absolutely fine. And A10 is actually I'm finding this really stressful and difficult. And that might be just because it is a very stressful thing to go through massively, or it might be because you've got a particularly stressful situation with a difficult ex, for example. or other things going on in your life. So if you're able to share that, that would be fantastic. Right. So just to round off before we move forwards with Susan, and also I'm going to give you a recap of everyone we've talked to. Okay, so get ready to put your information. I'm going to be asking you to be a little bit interactive in the chat, and as I say, if you're watching the recording, you can be emailing this to me or popping it into the chat in the Secret Divorce group. So ongoing support, cheap as chips. Some of you already in the Secret Divorce group, £29 a month after your 30 days free. Once you leave that, or if you haven't joined that yet, it's normally no 30 days free and £39 a month, which is still cheap as chips. Bearing in mind you've got the chat, you can ask questions anytime. You have a monthly Zoom, which I run after the Secret Divorce, after the Divorce TV show live stream, and you can come and talk to me. So you get a lot of ongoing support for that, which can really help you keep your costs down and keep stress down and keep you, talking to the right people at the right time. However, if you haven't joined the Secret Divorce group and you've got the ticket for this, there's one last chance. If you contact me within the next 24 hours, I can send you the link for the 30 days free at $29.1. Otherwise, if you just go straight to the website or the app, I'm afraid you'll have to pay that one. So just let you know, and it's just such a sensible thing for you to do, and as soon as you don't need it anymore, you can let it go. But I would recommend that people keep it at least until they've sorted the financials out, because it's amazing how many people come back a year later and they've gone off track and spent thousands of pounds, and I just say, well, why didn't you just stay? And I would have said to you, what are you doing? So it's just me trying to keep an eye on you and keep you on track, but made it cheap as chips, so please do make the most of it. Right, remind you of the experts. Now, for those of you who haven't had your complimentary session with Joanne the mediator, put Joanne please in the chat there, or send it to me via email if you're watching this as a recording. And you can have a complimentary talk with Joanne. She can talk about how she works and can tell and explain to you, if you're worried, how do I get my other half to embrace mediation. She's used to answering those questions, so make the most of that conversation. We'll send you information, all of you, as well about Austin. He has a very sensible, reasonably priced paid session, but you get a lot done in that. But the more prepared you get, the more of the other experts you've talked to as well. So when you go and talk to Austin, you're getting mega value for your session. And if you're lucky, that may be all you need, except perhaps if you need a proper consent order with the Kindworth solicitors really put it together for you. Austin can help you with that. Or if it's very, very straightforward, there are some other options as well, which I will let you know about. Debbie's not able to be with us today on this, but she is part of the gang. You'll see her video in the welcome pack for the workshop, which I hope you've all watched the videos that's inside the app on that one, and in the welcome pack. And Debbie has some great healing techniques that, if you're stressed, if you're lacking in confidence, all kinds of things she can help with, and she's happy to have a complimentary chat with you as well. So put Debbie in, and if you need to chat with Debbie, put Joanne in if you need a chat with Joanne, and put Austin in if you need a chat with Austin into the chat, because I will save that afterwards and have that and be able to give you personal email introductions to anyone that you said you need to talk to. Ruth, if you haven't already spoken to Ruth and you're thinking actually it would be a really good idea, please pop Ruth into the chat of the Zoom so I can see that, and I'll make sure you get an introduction. Henry, I think many of you have already spoken to Henry, but if you haven't, then and if you've got any money involved at all, which most people have, because I don't encourage people to do the workshop if they haven't, then you definitely need to talk to Henry. So pop Henry into the chat, and I'll give you a personalised introduction. If you've already spoken to Henry and you've it's usually there's a period when it's a good idea to go back again, and pay for the service, but at least then you know what it is you're getting and why. Or if you've got any other just quick questions for him, I'm sure he'll happy to answer them. But the more you can get the finances together before you go into mediation, before you use any other route through divorce, it'll save you so much time and money, and really helps keep it more peaceful, because the other person can see that you're not trying to rip them off. They can see why you're asking for what you are, and they can see the logic of it, and that's really, really important. I cannot express that enough. And then Susan, who does EFT, that tapping thing, which I've quite got into these days, thanks to her doing it so often on the divorce TV show live stream. Susan's also a health coach, and she's very kindly going to take us out of this workshop in a really calming way. And so if you also would like a complimentary session with Susan, again, pop that in the chat and I'll give you an introduction. You should see some information about Susan again in the welcome pack for the workshop.
Hello everyone, and you've got a full view of my working space. Hello. I'd like you to take this opportunity to gift yourself moments for calm and for quiet. Thoughts are part of everyone's human experience, and you don't need to keep pushing thoughts away. However, learning to bring your mind back from its thoughts is the necessary practice. But how do you let go of these thoughts once they've pulled you in? The little exercise that we're going to do offers one way to settle your thoughts, to unhook yourself from those thoughts and to simply let them be, without pushing them away or denying their presence. So please settle, feel comfortable, and take these few minutes and gently close your eyes if you wish. Notice the energy in your mind and in your body. The mind may be active. The body may feel worked up. You may notice lingering anxiety. Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise to settle our thoughts and to help you to unhook from the thoughts and simply let them be, without pushing them away or denying their presence. So settle down and close your eyes and notice the energy in your mind and body. The mind may be active or the body may feel worked up, or you may notice lingering anxiety. And I invite you right now to think of a shaken snow globe with all that energy whirling around. All those flakes swirling around in that snow globe. And as you rest the globe, the little snowflakes fall gently to the ground. Take a moment to picture that. And now think of yourself as a snow globe, and every snowflake as your thoughts, your undesirable thoughts. The thoughts swirling around in your mind and in your body. And now rest that globe. Rest your body. Rest your mind. And in this way, watch as each and every snowflake falls to the ground. Just watch as every thought grounds itself, just as those snowflakes. Don't force yourself to calm down. Let it happen slowly. just like the snowflakes. Now bring your attention to the breath in your body. Choose one spot where you can feel the breath. Breathe in and exhale. You may choose to feel the breath in your chest, or in the abdomen, in your shoulders, or in your nostrils. Observe the physical sensation of the body breathing. And bring your mind back when it wanders away. Stick with the snow globe visualization as the thoughts begin to rise up. Observe as they slowly settle down. Open your awareness to include your thoughts and your general mental state. And instead of returning to the breath when the mind wanders, notice what the mind is doing. You may notice yourself planning, fantasizing, figuring out, or replaying past experiences. Whatever you observe your mind doing, let it be. Try not to encourage the thought, but don't push it away either. Allow it to be. Allow it to be on its own. See if you can watch the passing of a thought as it flows its natural trajectory and then leaves the mind. Now return to the breath. Patiently wait until another thought arises. Notice it. Watch the thought and come back to the breath again. Notice when you are lost in thoughts, or when the mind wanders for some time. See if you can bring back that snow globe, and if you can, become that snow globe and then gently settle the snowflakes. And with it, the thoughts in your mind. They too can settle gently, without too much disturbance. We all have these thoughts. Gently, they can move away. When you're ready, gently open your eyes, breathe normally, and remember that you can gently be rid of thoughts that don't serve you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Sorry I made you have to start it again. You were very, very patient. That was lovely. It's really important to make time to meditate, to be calm. There's some fantastic apps. It's a real discovery. I wish I'd discovered these things earlier on when I was with my 3 small children going through the whole family breakup thing. And I cannot stress enough that if you don't work on your own sanity and calmness, you're not going to be able to parent properly, but also you're not going to make the right decisions on this journey. So I'm not just giving you permission, I'm ordering you, especially the women, because we're not very good at this, to really look after yourselves and to take time out. And that's why I have healers as part of the team, and make good use of them. And just to complete now, I want to thank everyone who's not just come along and participated today, but also who are watching this, because to even get a ticket to this workshop and participate watching it is a big step. A lot of people will stick their head in the sand, and then the next thing they know, they're fighting it out in court, and they're all over the place. So you've been really smart to take the courage as well. It takes courage to make a decision to go, actually, I'm going to find out better ways to do this. I'm going to come at this in a better way, and keep my options open, and not just be pushed down a nasty route just because maybe your ex is being difficult. So I just wanted to commend you for that, because it's no small feat. And the whole thing with, as I talk about in my TEDx, peace is not fluffy. So if you are trying to do things a better way, especially if you have children, that does take courage, and it takes determination, and you need to provide yourself with a good, strong support network to be able to achieve it. That's maybe co-parenting experts, it might be financial, you may need some legal support, mediation to get those decisions made, to cut those deals, but also obviously the well-being, emotional, psychological side. So if you do need any further support, you've got the experts we talked to here, but if you need anyone else, just come and talk to me in the Secret Divorce Group chats. I've lots of good people I could connect you with. Just wanted to mention again, with the co-parenting side, I do offer a special one-to-one, just where we set up we start to look at the co-parenting plan, and we start to set up the We Parent online diary, just to get you going, because I send people off with these things and they get busy. So if you want to just sit down with me and do it on Zoom and get it going, that's no problem. I can give you free access to We Parent and to Support Pay. Obviously you do have to pay for the session, but it's less than a normal strategy session would be. So I'll make sure you have information about that in case that's useful to you. But most importantly, if you're not part of the Secret Divorce Group, please join, and I'll send the link this one last time, and I send the link out tonight, where you can get the 30 days free, and it's only £29 a month after that. For those of you who are already in, make good use of it. The chat is there. If you've got a question, don't go and spend money on a lawyer asking a question that we can probably answer, because it's probably not even a legal question. If you're worried about something, or you're feeling bullied, put it in there, and the members of the group are very supportive, and if I don't know the answer to something, I will find someone who does. So do make use of that. Ruth's part of that group, Henry's part of that group, so it's a good chat group to be in. And then if you join us once a month, I just sit on Zoom, and I'm here for half an hour. We do run over sometimes, but come along and join in. Again, it's all part of the membership, and it's all ways to save you money and stress. So I'm going to take you out now. Thank you for participating. Remember that anyone with a ticket to this has access to complimentary calls with the experts who are part of the Best Way to Divorce. Just let me know who you want to talk to. I know some of you already have in the chat, and I will do a personal introduction, so they know that you've come from here, and they will very generously give you a session. But if you can afford to then go and use them a bit more, ultimately in many cases it will save you money and time, but you'll know that just from having that initial consultation with them. So good luck with your divorces. Make sure you use peace as your weapon of choice, and don't give up hope. If you ever feel down, we're always here for you. Come and talk to us, and do this the best way possible. Bye for now.